Effects of climate change have come under the spotlight once again after heavy rains leading to flooding have wreaked havoc in parts of South Africa and neighboring countries. And distinguished Professor of Sociology at the University of Johannesburg, Professor Patric Bond, joins us now to further unpack these developments. Professor, it's always a pleasure. Talk to us about these devastating effects of the recent floods in the country. As the climate change impact now becomes even more deadly and severe, should we brace even for more worse conditions? Good afternoon.
Yes, thanks for having me, Alicia, and greetings to your viewers. This is absolutely one of the sort of warning signs of massive rain in the eastern side of the country that the climate scientists have been predicting. We can never really do an attribution until quite a lot of scientific research is done, but we do have enough information about the way Mozambique especially is being flooded as a result of the higher temperatures in the Mozambique Channel between Madagascar and Mozambique. And that in turn brings more water into our eastern provinces, between 50 and 150 millimeters in different parts of Mozambique. So that's an extremely serious indication of, in addition to the droughts and the fires and drying soils, that we're going to have more floods and extreme weather events in Mozambique, probably looking in this cyclone season that's beginning for the kinds of terrifying events that occurred in 2019, where two huge cyclones hit and killed thousands.
Professor, you and I have been speaking at great length and also cautioning about these extreme climate conditions. And you had rightly predicted that we shouldn't and couldn't avoid these changes, and better planning around climate-ready infrastructure and even better disaster management planning and strategies, were needed. Are we anywhere near the required standard for events like mass evacuations and evacuation rescue plans, you think?
No, I think we're suffering from a general drought of infrastructure financing. That is, there hasn't been enough for the sorts of non-pecuniary roads and bridges that you've just seen falling apart. We certainly have our potholes in even the richest city, Johannesburg. So I think the lack of climate preparedness, of adaptation funding, of resilience reflects that the government hasn't, in spite of a bit of rhetoric, hasn't really taken this seriously. And one indication is in late December, Mayor Cyril Gaba in Durban said, we will now start our adaptation work. In other words, after terrible storms, including April 12, 2022, that killed 500 people and many since, the city of Durban, which has often been said to be amongst the most sophisticated with a climate unit and very good people in it, but they are only now beginning to do the sort of adaptation. And unfortunately, the one area that they chose to put most of their money into is in South Durban, in Isipingo, where there's a huge Toyota factory. And of course, that Toyota factory needs protection. It's getting lots of stormwater drainage funding and pumping funding because it lost thousands of cars in 2022. But unfortunately, those are petrol and diesel cars. They aren't making electric vehicles. This is the kind of contradiction I see so much in South Africa.
Professor, the consequences for South Africa are far and wide, right? Food and water safety, health, the economy, infrastructure, biodiversity are all at risk. And the ripple effects, if not adequately addressed and managed, could be far worse. We would basically be teetering near a total collapse of an entire ecosystem.
Yes, we'll really see that when the El Nino, El Nina effects are more amplified, and droughts, including 7-year droughts, perhaps one hitting Gauteng. And then we've got our battery of water, which is the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. But we've seen that go down, the big dams there, Katse and Mahale, down to 15% a few years ago. So even that wouldn't make it safe. I think the day zeros that are appearing in different parts of the country again, and Cape Town's near day zero in 2018, should have been the kind of indicators that we've got to be thinking more about mitigation. South Africa is the third highest emitter per person per unit of output, and that's because of our smelters and our deep mining. It's a very carbon-addicted economy, but also to make these investments, especially because it's basically poor and working-class people and women who are the most affected. And the fact that we don't have good investments, a small municipal fund that Minister Godongwana set up 2 years ago, maybe in the next budget, coming up in February, we will see, hopefully, an awareness that lots more money is needed, lots more jobs can be created as well. So this is a good investment in the society as well as our resilience.
But it's not just floods, right, Professor? These floods are often, followed by extreme heat waves, leading to very dry conditions and fell fires, as we saw last week in the Western as well as Eastern Cape. I mean, what would you then directly attribute these extreme weather patterns to?
Well, certainly we would need the attribution science to kick in to tell us, as we've learned on several other occasions, that a climate catastrophe is a result of the excess of CO2 in the atmosphere, which changes weather patterns. We don't have that yet for the current loss of life and loss and damage. But assuming that it is amplified by climate change, we should just be aware that the east side of the country will be seeing much more water. And that means better stormwater drainage and pumping, better roads and bridges, and better built houses so that we don't see the collapses, and especially in shack settlements, the really terrifying conditions on the one hand. But then for rural areas, and we're thinking again, Western Cape, Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, those will definitely be drying out, and so they'll need irrigation subsidies. There used to be quite a bit for white farmers during apartheid. Those were dropped as we went into a liberalization period. And I think it is time now to say, well, for the small farmers, the black farmers in some of the ex-homeland areas, and as we have hopefully better land reform, well, let's add water and irrigation systems to that as well. And then let's also look at our own consumption. And I would include middle-class people, like water, or when we're flying, we use too much CO2. And I think these are the sorts of tough questions. The biggest problems, though, may be solving themselves because there are so many smelters shutting down because they can't compete with the Chinese imports. And that may be why we don't have load shedding. The electricity is there, but unfortunately, it's still about 82% coal-fired power. So we certainly need to be making big changes. And even if Donald Trump's in office and, climate sanctions are hitting us from Europe, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, these are things we should be doing anyway.
Absolutely. Very critical indeed. Professor, thank you so much as always for that engagement. That was Professor Patric Bond. He's the Professor of Sociology at the University of Johannesburg, talking to us about the climate change impact here in South Africa.